He called it a cottage. Within a few generations, it would be gone. That was the first clue. He commissioned the largest summer house Newport had ever seen, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palazzo built from Indiana limestone and steel. A cottage. $7 million to build, over $200 million today. It still wouldn't be enough. It wasn't accidental. In that world, wealth spoke quietly. You built a palazzo on 14 oceanfront acres and described it, without irony, as somewhere you spent the summer. You hosted senators at dinner and called it an informal evening. You employed 58 servants to operate what you called a retreat. Newport understood the game. In 1895, when the Breakers opened its iron gates for the first time, Cornelius Vanderbilt II was playing it at a scale that made every other player look like they were barely trying. The name itself did not begin here. It began on a boat. In 1810, a 16-year-old boy on Staten Island borrowed $100 from his mother. He bought a small sailing vessel and began ferrying passengers between Staten Island and Manhattan. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He had no education, no connections, no inheritance, just an instinct for winning, and no tolerance for losing. What he had instead was an instinct for competition so ruthless that the other captains in the harbor gave him a title as a joke. They called him the Commodore. The name stayed with him for the rest of his life. He did not lose. That was the fact. Over 60 years, he expanded fast. Ferries became steamships. Competitors became casualties. In 1849, he opened a transit line across Nicaragua during the California Gold Rush, cutting 2 weeks off the Panama route. He ran 12 steamers to California and made $250,000 a month. Money was never the goal. Control was. He is said to have admitted once, "I have been insane on the subject of money-making all my life." He moved into railroads in his 60s, when most men that were rich were already thinking about retirement. He bought the New York and Harlem Railroad in 1862, then the Hudson River Railroad, then the New York Central in 1867, stitching everything together into one corridor running from New York City all the way to Chicago. He built Grand Central Depot. He ran a continent. Rivals tried everything to slow him down. They failed. A man who owns nothing he is afraid to lose is very difficult to beat. Near the end of his life, the Commodore said he could buy anything he wanted. He had simply never wanted much. He owned no great estate. He made one significant philanthropic gift, $1 million to a small Methodist university in Nashville, Tennessee in 1873. The university named itself after him. Its athletic teams are still called the Commodores. When the Commodore died on January 4, 1877, at the age of 82, his estate was valued at roughly $100 million. More than was held at that moment in the United States Treasury, 5% of all the money in circulation in the country. One of the largest private accumulations of wealth in the history of the world, built from 100 borrowed dollars and 67 years of refusing to be beaten. That is the foundation this building stood on. His son, William, doubled it. Not through conquest, but through discipline. William Henry Vanderbilt ran the railroads his father had assembled with a precision the Commodore had never bothered with. Organized, methodical, less dramatic, more effective. He sold a major portion of the New York Central stock in 1879 for a reported $64 million, enough to pay off the Vanderbilt debt entirely and leave a substantial surplus. He grew the family holdings to nearly $200 million before dying of a stroke in his own library in November 1885, just 8 years after his father. He was 64 years old. William divided what he had. He left 2 sons, Cornelius and William K., the largest shares. He left 8 children in total. The strategy that had kept the fortune concentrated for 2 generations ended the morning his will was read. The money began almost immediately to scatter. Cornelius Vanderbilt II was William's eldest son. He was born on November 27, 1843, on Staten Island, the same island where the Commodore had started everything. He worked his way up through the family's railroad offices and became chairman of the New York Central in 1885. Peers described him as capable and conservative, a strong accountant, someone who could be trusted with numbers. He and his wife Alice had met while both taught Sunday school at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church. He taught Sunday school his entire adult life. He He was active in the Red Cross, the YMCA, the Salvation Army. He donated so heavily and so consistently that he died with less money than he had inherited, despite running the most powerful railroad in the country for 14 years. Friends who knew him well remarked that he never seemed happy. He carried his position like a weight he had been handed and never asked for. The Vanderbilt name was not just a name. It came with expectations about how you behaved, what you built, what you gave, who you entertained. He took all of it seriously. Too seriously, some said. He had the money and the title and the house and the railroad, and by all accounts, he never once relaxed into any of it. And in 1892, after a fire consumed his earlier Newport house, while the family was inside for Christmas, he decided what came next would not burn. He hired Richard Morris Hunt. He told Hunt he wanted something fireproof. That conversation produced a palazzo. Hunt was the first American architect to graduate from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the most prestigious architectural school in the world. He had designed Marble House for William K. Vanderbilt 2 years before, and before that, the base of the Statue of Liberty. The Breakers would become his final major project. He died 3 weeks before the housewarming party. He modeled the design on the Renaissance palaces of Genoa and Turin, taking particular inspiration from a specific palazzo he had studied on the Via Garibaldi in Genoa, built in 1565 for the Grimaldi family. He brought on the sculptor Carl Bitter for exterior relief work, and the Paris firm of Allard & Sons for interior fixtures and furnishings. Their Paris workshops built the entire music room from scratch, shipped it across the Atlantic, and reassembled it inside the house. It took 2 years, 70 rooms across 5 floors, 27 fireplaces. The entrance hall rose 50 feet with a gold leaf ceiling. Even the decorations were a lecture. Limestone figures above each door celebrating human achievement. Galileo, Dante, Apollo, Mercury, Hunt, Bitter. The dining room was 58 feet long and 2 stories tall. 12 rose alabaster columns surrounded the room. 2 baccarat crystal chandeliers hung overhead. The table seated 34. The morning room's wall panels, originally thought to be silver leaf, were eventually tested by conservators with a portable X-ray machine. They were platinum. The library was paneled in Circassian walnut, its walls covered in Spanish leather embossed with gold, its fireplace brought from the Château d'Arnay-le-Duc in Burgundy, a 16th century French chateau whose owners had died centuries before the Vanderbilts were born. Above that fireplace, in the stone of the original chateau, was an inscription in archaic French. Translated, it read, "Little do I care for riches, and do not miss them, since only wisdom prevails in the end." Cornelius Vanderbilt II read those words every time he sat in that room. The building cost $7 million. Alice had a marble bathtub carved from a single block. 4 taps, hot and cold fresh water, hot and cold salt water. The salt water pumped from the ocean through cisterns on the roof. 2 enormous boilers consumed 150 tons of coal per year. 33 indoor servants and 25 outdoor staff, 58 in total, kept it operational around the clock, and they came for 6 weeks in summer. A cottage by the sea. When the Breakers opened, Newport already understood the Vanderbilts had won. The city's social world was organized around a single institution: acceptance. For decades, Newport's summer season was controlled by old money families whose wealth came from inheritance and land. They had been watching the Vanderbilts arrive for years, and they treated them the way old money always treats new money, with polite, cold distance. The Vanderbilts were not on the list, not invited, not considered, not even close. The man controlling that decision was Ward McAllister. McAllister had spent years as the social arbiter of New York's elite, working alongside Mrs. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the undisputed queen of the city's old money establishment. Together, they had formalized the famous list of the 400, the number of people in New York society worth knowing. Mrs. Astor found railroad money distasteful, not for moral reasons, for aesthetic ones. The Vanderbilts had made their fortune too recently, too loudly, too publicly. The Commodore had destroyed competitors in full view of the newspapers. William had sold $64 million of stock in one transaction so large it moved markets. That was not how old money behaved. It did not make moves, simply existed. The Vanderbilts forced their way in. It was Cornelius's brother William K. and his wife Alva who forced the door open. In 1883, Alva Vanderbilt threw a costume ball at her new Fifth Avenue chateau, the most elaborate private entertainment New York had ever seen. Over 1,000 guests attended. Mrs. Astor's own daughter desperately wanted to attend. Mrs. Astor had not called on Alva Vanderbilt, which made the invitation impossible. So she made the formal call. She left her card. The invitation followed. And with that single act of capitulation, the Vanderbilts were on the list. The cost of the ball was estimated at $250,000. When the Breakers opened in 1895, the battle was over. But Cornelius, as the senior Vanderbilt and head of the family, needed his summer house to announce that position to everyone who arrived in Newport each June. If Marble House had been a weapon, the Breakers was a throne room. In the same year the building opened, Cornelius and Alice threw a coming-out party for their daughter Gertrude. 300 guests. The society columns described Gertrude as the richest prospective heiress in America, her inheritance worth no less than $20 million. To receive an invitation to the Breakers was to be told, by the most powerful family in America, that you had been considered and found worthy. In Newport in 1895, that judgment carried enormous weight. Senators came to dinner. Foreign ambassadors came to dinner. Ward McAllister himself, the man who had spent a career deciding who mattered and who did not, had died in January 1895, eating alone in a dining room at the Union Club, ostracized by the society he had spent his life curating. His funeral was attended by Cornelius Vanderbilt II, not by Mrs. Astor. The arbiter was gone, and the family he had once kept at arm's length was now the most formidable host in Newport. Cornelius and Alice understood exactly what the building was. Not a home. A proof. An argument made in stone and limestone and platinum wall panels that the Vanderbilts had not merely arrived, but prevailed. The railroad was running. The fortune was intact. The building was new. The inscription above the library fireplace had not yet been tested against anything real. The dynasty sat at its absolute peak, and it had been there for exactly 1 year when everything changed. By the time the Breakers opened, the fracture had already begun. The heir was gone. The replacement refused to obey. This was the moment the dynasty turned on itself. William Henry Vanderbilt II had been 21 years old, a junior at Yale, when typhoid fever took him in 1892. The same year the first Breakers burned, 2 losses in one summer, one that could be rebuilt and one that could not. Cornelius endowed a dormitory at Yale in his son's memory. He placed a bronze bust of the boy inside the library of the house he was building. You can see it there today. The second son, Cornelius Vanderbilt III, known within the family as Neely, was next in line. He was 23 in 1896 when he announced his intention to marry Grace Graham Wilson, the daughter of a New York banker. His father refused. Alice refused. The family opposed it. The pressure brought to bear on Neely was direct, sustained, and unambiguous. "If you marry this woman," Cornelius told his son, "you will no longer be my heir." Neely's reason for going ahead was simple. He loved her. He was 23 years old, and nobody had yet convinced him that his future was not his own to decide. On the morning of June 18, 1896, the day Neely had originally planned his wedding, he collapsed with a violent attack of rheumatism. The wedding was postponed. That same morning, at the Breakers, Cornelius argued with his son one final time. The family doctor was called to the house. He arrived to find not Neely, but Cornelius himself collapsed. Massive stroke. Paralyzed on his right side. Unable to speak. He survived. Recovered partial function over the following months. He never recovered his son. Neely married Grace 2 months later, in August. That same month, another wedding took place at the Breakers. Cornelius's younger son, Alfred, was marrying Ellen French. The entire family was present, except Neely and his new wife. The will was dated the same day as the argument and the stroke. That was the cost. When Cornelius died 3 years later at 55, the terms were read in the library at the Breakers, beside the fireplace. The one that said, "Wisdom prevails in the end." Alfred received $43 million. Alfred's share eventually reached an estimated $70 million after accounting for all bequests. Neely received $500,000 in cash, and the income from a $1 million trust. The newspapers did the arithmetic. They ran an item noting that the difference between the shares was the measure of the father's disapproval of his son's marriage. Alfred gave Neely $6 million from his own share. He thought the punishment was too harsh. He was right. But the will was the will. The patriarch was dead, and Neely would spend the rest of his life as a Vanderbilt in name only, close enough to feel the weight of what had happened, too far outside it to change anything. Neely went back to Yale and earned a degree in mechanical engineering. He held more than 30 patents. He helped sponsor the yacht that defended the America's Cup in 1903. He served in the Spanish-American War and rose to brigadier general. The talent his father had dismissed had quietly become a remarkable life. Alice Vanderbilt, his mother, returned his father's rejection of him even after Cornelius died. She did not invite Neely and Grace to family gatherings at the Breakers. She did not acknowledge Grace directly for years. But Grace Wilson Vanderbilt did something the family had not anticipated. She built her own social empire from scratch. She rented Beaulieu, one of Newport's great cottages, right down the street from the Breakers, and began hosting on a scale that rivaled the family that had tried to erase her. In a single year, she entertained 37,000 guests. She became one of the most celebrated hostesses in America. The woman they had shunned outlasted nearly all of them. Neely died in 1942 aboard his yacht in Miami. Grace lived until 1953. Neither was ever fully welcomed back to the Breakers. But Grace had long since stopped needing the invitation. The disinheritance did not destroy Neely, but it sent a message that every generation after him heard clearly. The Vanderbilt name came with conditions. The fortune was not love. It was a tool for control. Cornelius had punished his son through his will and in doing so put the entire family on notice. Cornelius Vanderbilt II had barely lived in the building he spent $7 million constructing. He had owned the Breakers since 1885. The new house opened in 1895. He suffered his stroke in 1896 and withdrew from active management of the railroad. He died in 1899. 4 summers. He had been here for 4 summers. He built a house to anchor the dynasty for generations. He put an inscription about wisdom above the fireplace so his children would see it every day. He died before any of it was tested, before any of it could resolve. What he left behind was a machine that no longer made money, only demands. Alice Vanderbilt lived in this building for 35 years after her husband died. She became a formidable figure in Newport and New York society, known for her rigidity and her standards. She spent her winters at the family's mansion on Fifth Avenue and her summers here. She dressed for dinner every night, even when no one came. She died in 1934 at the age of 89. By the time she died, the fortune her husband had inherited was substantially reduced. The mansions required enormous maintenance. The taxes on the Newport property alone had exceeded what most families earned in a year. The Vanderbilts were still wealthy by ordinary standards. They were not wealthy by Vanderbilt standards. And the Breakers, which had been designed to the scale of Vanderbilt standards, required Vanderbilt resources to sustain. One by one, the rooms Alice no longer needed had their furniture covered in white sheets. The great house was still standing, still maintained, still occupied each summer, but the staff moved through it more quietly now, closing doors behind them that no one would open again until the following June. They spent, built, but never earned enough to match it. The Commodore had even warned in his way that his children had not learned from him. He had insulted them for years, called them blatherskates and blockheads, refused to teach them the mechanics of what he had built. And then, on his deathbed, he concentrated everything in one son's hands and hoped the concentration would survive the inheritance. 1 generation, it held. The next, it scattered. Third, it was gone. Reginald Vanderbilt, the youngest son of Cornelius and Alice, had inherited approximately $7.5 million at 21. He had also received the income from a $5 million trust. He attended Yale, but never graduated. Married twice. His second wife was 19 when she married him. He was 42. He was already dying. His daughter was 1 year old when he died. Her name was Gloria. She grew up to become a fashion designer and artist, famous in the 1970s for her signature line of designer jeans. Her custody battle became one of the most sensational legal proceedings of the 1930s. Newspapers called it the trial of the century. Her aunt Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney eventually won custody. Gloria said in interviews decades later that she never felt like she belonged anywhere growing up. She felt like an imposter her entire childhood. Her son, Anderson Cooper, became one of the most recognized journalists in America. He has said publicly that he received nothing from the Vanderbilt line. He built his career entirely from nothing. The great-great-great-grandson of the Commodore started from zero. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the son who had given Neely $6 million from his own share because the punishment seemed excessive, had inherited the largest share of the estate. He was 22 years old when his father died and received the news while traveling in Japan. He sailed home immediately. He spent his 30s managing Oakland Farm in Rhode Island, breeding horses, and crossing the Atlantic with the ease of a man who never had to think about whether he could afford the trip. On May 1, 1915, Alfred Vanderbilt boarded the RMS Lusitania in New York, bound for Liverpool. He was traveling to attend a meeting of the International Horse Breeders Association. That morning, the German embassy had taken out a notice in American newspapers warning that vessels flying Allied flags in the war zone around the British Isles were liable to attack. Alfred and his wife read the notice. They laughed it off. On May 7, 1915, off the coast of County Cork in Ireland, a German U-boat designated U-20 fired a torpedo into the Lusitania's starboard side. A secondary explosion followed immediately. The ship listed and began to sink. In 18 minutes, it was gone. Alfred had spent those 18 minutes in the water and on the listing decks helping women and children into the lifeboats. He could not swim. He stayed anyway, knowing exactly how it would end. Eyewitnesses noted his composure. He put a life belt on a woman's shoulders and walked away without speaking. He had promised a young mother holding an infant that he would find her a life belt. There were no more life belts. He gave her his own. He tied it onto her himself since she was holding the baby in her arms and could not do it alone. Someone shouted at him to hurry. He did not hurry. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, the man who gave his brother $6 million because the punishment seemed excessive, the man who had grown up eating dinner beneath the goddess Aurora on her chariot in the most spectacular dining room in America, was last seen standing calmly on the deck of a sinking ship. His body was never recovered. He was 37 years old, and the Atlantic, which had been the view from the library window his whole life, took him. Just like that. The railroad declined, control drifted, and nothing replaced it. On Fifth Avenue, where the Vanderbilts had once lined the most prestigious street in America with palaces, the demolitions began in 1914. Cornelius II's own mansion at 640 and 642 Fifth Avenue had been the largest private townhouse ever built in New York City. 6 years to construct. It opened in 1882. It stood for 44 years before being torn down in 1926 and replaced by Bergdorf Goodman. The family no longer had the staff or the income to run it. The land was worth more without the family on it. William K. Vanderbilt's mansion on Fifth Avenue, the one Alva had used to force open the doors of New York society in 1883, came down in 1926 as well. Marble House in Newport survived only because it was sold to a coal merchant in 1932. The other great Newport cottages were sold, donated, or shuttered one by one. By 1947, every Vanderbilt mansion on Fifth Avenue was gone, replaced by office buildings and department stores. 30 years, 10 palaces, rubble. Gladys Vanderbilt Chechenyi had inherited approximately $25 million from her father and $5 million from her mother. It sounded like enough. It wasn't. She had grown up in this building, the only summer home she had ever known. After her husband, Count Laszlo Szechenyi, who had served as Hungary's minister to the United States, died in 1938, she was left alone with a property that needed a railroad fortune to run. She no longer had one, and the war would soon take what remained of his. The Second World War made the situation stark in a different way. Count Szechenyi's properties and assets in Hungary were seized in the upheaval of the war and its aftermath. Whatever his fortune had been was gone. Gladys was running a 70-room palazzo on her own on a cliff in Rhode Island, with property taxes that had once required 58 servants and the income of one of the great railroad fortunes in American history. She offered the building to civilian defense during the war. In January 1943, more than 500 air raid wardens and auxiliary workers used its basements in a civil defense drill. The house, built for 34 at a dinner table, had become an emergency staging ground. The breakers served as the first designated air raid shelter in Newport. Gladys was present in her capacity as a Red Cross volunteer. In 1948, Gladys made the arrangement that would define the building's next 70 years. She leased the breakers to the Preservation Society of Newport County for $1 a year, for a house that once defined American wealth. She retained the third floor as a private apartment and continued paying the property taxes herself. The arrangement was unprecedented, a museum that still had the family living above the exhibits. Visitors began arriving in July 1948 to tour a house where the descendants of its builders still slept 8 rooms above them. Gladys moved through the floors above the tour groups, continuing the domestic routines she had observed here for decades. The first season's ticket price was $1.25 per adult. Over 1.5 million people paid to tour the breakers before the Preservation Society eventually bought it outright. The society opened more rooms to the public over time. The house became famous. It became the centerpiece of Newport's summer tourism. Visitors came from across the country and eventually from around the world to stand in rooms that had once been private, to photograph ceilings that had been built for one family's 6 weeks each summer. For Gladys, who had grown up in this building and spent her adult life trying to hold it together, the museum was both a rescue and a strange kind of grief. The rooms she had known as private were now described on placards. The spaces where her family had eaten dinner were roped off and photographed. The building survived, but the life inside it was gone. Gladys died in 1965. Her daughter, Countess Sylvia Sapari, sold the breakers to the Preservation Society of Newport County on December 28, 1972, for $365,000. 90% of the furnishings were included in the sale. The family gifted much of what remained. They had been offering pieces of the estate for decades: paintings, silver, furniture, objects whose provenance was the building itself. $365,000. The building that had cost $7 million in 1895, $220 million in today's terms, changed hands for less than the price of a modest house in a secondary American city. The sale agreement included a provision. Sylvia was granted life tenancy on the 3rd floor. She lived there each summer until her death in 1998. After that, the Preservation Society's board president sent a letter to her children, Paul and Gladys Sapari, the great-grandchildren of Cornelius Vanderbilt II. The letter said they were welcome to keep using the apartment. No formal lease, no rent. The letter explained why. It said, "It will be helpful to us to be able to tell our visitors that the original owner's great-grandchildren continue to live in the house. The family was now a marketing asset. That is what it had come to." Paul and Gladys Sapari were not the richest Vanderbilts, nor even the particularly prominent ones. They were the last ones, the last direct descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, still connected to the buildings he built. For years, it worked. The Preservation Society ran the museum. The family used the apartment. Visitors came through the rooms below and were told that the great-grandchildren of the original owners still lived upstairs. It was a good story. The kind of story that makes a house feel like more than a museum. And for decades, everyone was happy with the arrangement. In 2015, the Preservation Society announced plans to build a new welcome center on the grounds, a modern commercial structure in the garden of a National Historic Landmark, including ticketing stations, interactive screens, bathrooms, and a cafe. 3,750 square feet. Cost $5.5 million. The Sapari family opposed it. Other Vanderbilt relatives opposed it. Gloria Vanderbilt opposed it. Preservation experts submitted formal objections. The Newport Zoning Board approved it anyway. The family took it to court. They lost. Relations between the family and the Preservation Society, which had been described publicly as harmonious for decades, deteriorated quickly. The board president sent a memo to the family noting that family members had contributed only $4,000 to the organization in recent years, and that most of their items displayed at the breakers were, in his word, minor, including objects the institution dismissed as insignificant. In January 2018, a new report concluded that the mansion's electrical, plumbing, and ventilation systems were too dangerous for residential use. The family would need to leave. But here's the thing. The sub-Paris had been raising those exact concerns for years. They had written letters. The society had not responded. Now the same problems were being used to remove them. A cousin of the family named Jamie Wade Comstock said it directly. Visitors will soon find that the gilded cage was much more interesting when it still had the birds inside it. Gladys Sapari told a journalist, "I am waiting for them to throw my clothes out the window." The Preservation Society opened its $5.5 million welcome center in June 2018. The same month, the family departed. Gladys Sapari spent her final hours at the breakers mopping the floors. She turned off the lights, she closed the doors, and she went through each room slowly, making sure it was clean. Nothing left undone. Before she got into the elevator for the last time, she stood at the entrance to the empty rooms and listened. The building was already sounding different. Then she descended, and the breakers, for the first time in over a century, held no Vanderbilts at all. 120 descendants. The children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren of the man who had borrowed $100 from his mother on Staten Island. It had been divided, spent, scattered across 6 generations. Within 30 years, they were no longer among the richest in America. Rockefeller had surpassed them. Carnegie had surpassed them. Ford had surpassed them. Within 50 years, one of his direct descendants died with nothing at all. 96 years later, 120 of his family sat together in Nashville for the very first time, and not one of them was a millionaire. Gertrude Vanderbilt, Cornelius and Alice's daughter, had at least redirected her inheritance into something lasting. She had grown up in this building, spent her debut party in this music room, and was married in it in 1896 to Harry Payne Whitney. She became a sculptor, though she worked under a pseudonym for years, convinced that if people knew she was a Vanderbilt, they would not take her work seriously. She was right to worry. When she offered her collection of nearly 700 American artworks to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1929, they turned her down. The Met only collected European art. American work was considered provincial. Gertrude's response was to found her own museum. The Whitney Museum of American Art opened in 1931. It still exists. The rejection that might have ended someone else became one of the most important institutions in American cultural life. A Vanderbilt descendant named Arthur T. Vanderbilt II eventually wrote the definitive account of the family's collapse. He was a lawyer. He had inherited the name but not the wealth. He called the book Fortune's Children. The subtitle, The Fall of the House of Vanderbilt. William K. Vanderbilt, one of the Commodore's own grandsons, had said it plainly decades earlier. Inherited wealth, he said, is a real handicap to happiness. It is as certain a death to ambition as cocaine is to morality. The house was still standing. The family was not. The limestone is original. The gold leaf ceiling remains. The columns, walnut and bronze busts unchanged. Little do I care for riches and do not miss them, since only wisdom prevails in the end. The man who spent the equivalent of $220 million on a summer cottage read those words every summer of the 4 years he lived in this building. He placed them in the room where his children would see them most. What the Commodore built was a machine. What Cornelius II built was a monument. One created wealth, the other consumed it, and no one knew how to build the machine again. The generations that followed couldn't tell the difference. 10 mansions on 5th Avenue demolished. The railroad that ran the continent went bankrupt. 120 descendants gathered in Nashville in 1973, not one of them holding $1 million. The last Vanderbilts were evicted from the building their great-great-grandfather built. In the same season, the Welcome Center opened, and the gift shop began selling souvenir prints of the dining room. And the Breakers is still here. The ocean still crashes below it, indifferent as it has always been to everyone who has ever claimed to own the cliff above it. 450,000 people walk through here every year. They passed the bronze busts on the library shelves: William, who died of typhoid at Yale; Alfred, who drowned on the Lusitania. Two young men placed here by a father who outlived them both and died at 55, still grieving. It was there before the Vanderbilts arrived. It will be there long after the last visitor leaves. Cornelius built this building to last. He was right about the stone, wrong about everything that mattered. The Commodore knew better. His grandson did not inherit that understanding. Eventually, the building outlasted the family that built it.